Okay, perfect. So, hi, Anita. Thank you for your reply. Um, so we are a French journalist, and we write a book about the evolution of women in the Olympic Games since 1896, even if there were no women at that time. I'm going to start with the first question. When you were appointed vice president of the IOC in 1997, did you realize what a revolution it was to be the first woman in history to hold this position?
The question about being the first has always seemed to me an odd one, because isn't it more important not to be the last? Yeah. So my goal, being the first, is always not to be the last. So I think I was more surprised because I was more surprised on becoming a member of the IOC that I was the fifth woman elected to the IOC. That was more of a surprise to me than being elected vice president, because by then I knew my colleagues and I knew them to be good people and to be people who cared about the future of the Olympic movement, and who realized that you can't have the future of the Olympic movement with only 50% of the world's population involved. That just wouldn't work. So once we got to talking about things, it was easier to help them understand why it was so important to involve women at every level of sport.
And when you joined the IOC as a member in 1986, did you feel that you belonged there and you were well integrated at that time?
I was welcome for certain. It's hard to be one of five in a group of 100 when there are 85 or that are not, did I do that math correctly? 90. I guess 95 who are not the same as you. But I've been, throughout my life, I've had that experience as someone with my skin color in the country where I live. That was always a sign of difference before anybody ever got to know me. And that's why it was so important that my mom taught us that we are one race, the human race. We are all the same, and yet we are each unique. I like to add, even identical twins are not identical. So let's get over this and move on with respecting each individual for what each one brings. And I think that was very, very important to me.
And 11 years later, you finally reached the position of vice president. Did you fight for it, or it was a logical step?
That's always an interesting question within the IOC. You have to make yourself known to others that you have an interest in taking on new roles, and you have to do it in a way that will not make people offended by the fact that you want to take on the new role. And I had to do it while working with people who were sometimes 20 to 30 years older than I was. So although in my own body, I didn't feel like a brash youngster, but compared with the other ones who've been there longer, I probably was. So you have to take all these things into consideration and mainly be at peace with what you're offering and what you're asking people to vote for you for what you can bring to the table.
And what was the first change you want to make when you become vice president of the IOC?
The first? My goodness.
Yeah, your first idea.
The first idea, yeah.
The first thing I did, or the first idea that I had?
Or maybe the first thing you wanted to do.
Oh gosh, unfortunately there were a lot. To me, again, the basis was to understand the difference between equity and equality. Equity is short of equality, and perhaps it's a tool for getting to equality. But the goal always had to be equality. So getting us to speak in terms of equality instead of equity although it's only in English. I couldn't be as precise in other languages, but if I could be that precise in English, then the IOC could be that precise in English as well. And I'm very pleased to say that now we speak of equality, not equity.
And earlier, you say the phrase that it's close to your heart. We are one race, and the human race. We are all the same, and we are each unique. For you, is this the power of sport, bringing all human beings together on an equal footing?
Yes and no, because the power of the Olympic movement is for excellence. I call the Olympic Games a celebration of human excellence. And sport is sort of the crucible for human excellence, but it's not the only thing. You can have a wonderful game of something or other, or even a wonderful regatta, without having anyone reach the fastest time ever and still feel that it was a great regatta. So, yes, it is a great way for bringing people together and learning to respect one another. But also, at a certain point, we have to be clear on who is competing against whom.
And it's a little bit a philosophic question, but do you think we can live in an egalitarian world, a world with everyone equal?
Why not? Why not? We're human. We're all human. So at some point, if we could get people to just take a breath for a moment and think about living together, and the fact that the reason there's more, to me, the reason there is more than one person on earth is because we're supposed to work together. And it's logical.
And the French population doesn't realize that a few years ago, sport wasn't necessarily considered a right for women. Many women have told us, for example, that they couldn't play sport, that they saw their brother doing it. When do you think things started to change?
It depends on which level when we speak of change, because change starts
maybe in competition level.
Well, at the competition level, then we have to go with national, international.
Yeah.
So for a long, long time, women have been competing internationally, but no one was paying attention. For example, even in ski jumping, women were competing against men, although women were cleverly disguised as men as they were competing against men. So it's been happening for a very long time, and indeed for so long that not all the records are correct on women's competition. We think there was a woman on board one of the sailing ships in the 1896 games, which would make her the first woman to compete at the games if she did. We know that there was a woman who did her best to compete in the marathon, but they wouldn't allow her, so she raced a day later and had a reasonable time in it. So throughout time, women have been doing what is normal to humans, taking part in sport. And we are the only species that takes part in sport. So it is really ours to do. And we do it because it involves the mind directing the body through the dimensions of time and space. I think all sports involve time and space. Baseball, I've never been too sure about. But there is a time limit even on baseball.
Yeah.
So, what else can I tell you?
You said that the fourth World Conference of Women in Beijing was the start of a lot of things. Can you tell us why? It was in 1995, if I remember well.
Tell me the date again.
1995 in Beijing, the World Conference of, I think it was World Conference on Women in Beijing.
Yes, well, that was a very important world conference because people were speaking out, and even in a community that was thought not to be very interested in having people speak out. Certainly the First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Clinton, was there and spoke out. And we were there to listen to women of the world. Now, the IOC goes places and listens. We don't always take part because if it's an organization like this UN conference was not about women in sport, it was about women. And we kind of wanted them to speak about women in sports, so we helped be a section on that, and we helped staff that section. But the overall conference was not about women in sport; it was women in general, and we felt that we had to have women in sport discussed, and so we did. So that was very important.
Yeah. And women's sports began to find its place at the Olympic Games in the 80s and 90s. It was not far away from now, notably with the arrival of a certain sport that until they had not been authorized for women. Did you feel supported in your fight for greater acceptance of sportswomen?
I did not quite. I missed your question.
Did you feel, Julien? What was the sense of the question? Did you feel? Did you feel that the sportswoman was finally being supported in the 80s and 90s, or it was difficult at this time too? Or did you feel that change started to come?
The world is a huge place. And once we got the Olympic movement to start recognizing the significance of specifically including women instead of generally saying all the youth of the world, but specifically saying all the young women and young men of the world, was a big difference to be specific, because people thought, well, it's a nice thing to think that women should or shouldn't, but what's the truth? Well, women can and do. So, and should and must. And getting that thought out there more than just in a few terracotta bases that you find with a woman boxing or a woman throwing a spear or something. We know it's happened because it's the human thing to have happen. And so to me, the Olympic movement needed to look like humanity.
When you arrived inside the IOC, did you feel that the other people were in the IOC thinks that the fight for the equality between men and women was an important fight, or it was not that much important for them?
Well, each person, of course, has their own viewpoint on the world, which is what makes it so exciting. So I cannot say to you what each person thought. I can tell you that I felt comfortable, and as often as I unfortunately had to, as one of the IOC presidents called it, I had to, I forgot it. Oh, well, I had to, shame and blame. That's what it was. I had to shame and blame my colleagues in sports and in federations and in national Olympic committees where they had made no progress. And there's, we were in the 21st century. Come on. By now, progress should have long been made. And so there's really no excuse. I remember in the early days, once or twice, someone would say to me, "But Anita, we have no women." And I would say, "Wow, I'd like to visit your country. I've never seen a country with no women. How do you make that happen? How does that work? What do you mean you have no women?" And that's the whole point. Just like, the difference, one thing I've learned is the difference between men and women is that both will volunteer as much, but men will volunteer. Women want to be volunteered. In other words, we don't want to put our hands up to say that, yes, we'll do it. And men will put their hands up before they even know what it is, because that's the difference. Women need to be asked to volunteer, and men don't.
And in 1995, Antonio Samaranch set up the Women and Sports Commission to advise the executive committee on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. What was the role of this commission? What are its responsibilities?
Well, originally, our role was to advise the executive committee, and executive board, we call it. I have to get these words right. And every commission, every IOC commission is to advise the executive board. And once you have a proposal to the executive board, and the commission meets once a year and can do other work throughout the year, as we often did, then you make your report to the executive board, make your suggestions, and then you hope the executive board will accept your suggestions. And over time, they did. And so we started out with a very modest goal of having at least 5% of your board. Is it 5%? Then 10%, then 20%, 30%. And now I think even within the IOC membership, we're up to 40% women, maybe a little bit more. So bit by bit, we were able to do what we needed to do. Yeah. It took longer than I thought it would, but it didn't take 60 years, as one young man in a class I taught had figured out. I said, it'll be 60 years before a man can be elected to the IOC. I said, well, it took 80 years for them to elect the first woman, so we're okay. We're good. Yeah. We're good. So it didn't take 54 years, though.
In 1997, when you were elected vice president of the IOC, it was Antonio Samaranch, the president. He fight a lot for the right of the woman in IOC too. Do you have the memory of a man who want to do a great deal to advance the position of women and the position of women in sports?
I think it's beautiful that it was a Spaniard who was the biggest promoter of women in sport, for all the things that people think or say about Spaniards. He also saw a picture of the world and realized that the picture of the IOC didn't look the same as the picture of the world, and realized that he needed to do something. And so he got the people around him who would do something, as I figure it. But it was a lot of fun learning from him, learning how he had strategized to get things accomplished. And we always knew that at the end of a discussion, if he says, well, we'll discuss this some more again, it means that he didn't win, but he didn't lose either. So the discussion would continue and see if he could figure out a way to convince us better. And I like that, the fact that you would make your attempt to convince people and see what people, or listen to what people had to say, and then move on from there. And it was a useful way. We had some very tough times to move through, because who are we? We're a group of people who volunteer for something we think is important, sport. That's who we are. And the Olympic movement is made up of people who believe that the Olympic movement is something good and beneficial in the world. I believe it is, as I call it a celebration of human excellence, and it inspires others to do good. So I am what I call a true believer in the benefits of the Olympic movement.
And how can the IOC influence the place of women in sports? What power does it have? Does it have the capacity to discuss with a federation to bring a change?
Yes, it is us. We have met the enemy, and it is us, in the words of a cartoonist in the U.S. Polo. We have to do better. It's nobody else. And our area is sport, and we should, as they say, stay in our lane. We can't move out of our lane because we're not a government. We don't have an army. We can't do much more than say, if you want to be a part of this very good Olympic movement, where we work towards excellence, then you have to follow these rules. And if you don't want to follow these rules, you can't be a part. And thus you have Russia not being a part, and Belarus. Although they're athletes, if they manage to have enough anti-doping tests and so forth, then there's a chance that they could compete, but without their flag, our national anthem, which is really the only way to punish a country for doing bad things to its athletes. Or to the world, doing bad things to the world.
Yeah, and this is where sports and politics are next to each other. There is a very thin line between the two.
Not really. In sports, we don't kill one another. In sports, we don't take somebody's territory. In sports, we don't say you can't come back here anymore. In sports, we say these are the rules. Accept the rules or not. But if you want to play the sport, you have to accept these rules because everybody else is accepting these rules. And if we find someone who's cheating, we'll get rid of them for you. And that's why we now have 10 years. And in 10 years, we find the cheats for sure. And we've done a pretty good job of that.
Yeah.
Although people are surprised, like 8 years later, to find out they don't get to keep that medal that they pretended to have won.
And we don't really know, but what are the job of the vice president of the IOC? What he need to do more than the other member of IOC?
Well, to a certain part, all of the IOC depends on the relationships of member to member. So the vice presidents, the president can ask the vice president to do specific tasks or not. It depends on the president and what the president feels is necessary. So each year there's a new vice president elected because one goes off. Although we have this weird thing where we have two going off at the same time, as we will in Paris. And for some reason, we've just kept it that way instead of making one go off in a different year. Don't know why, but that's the way it is. So there'll be two vice presidents elected in Paris. Normally there's one. And then two members of the executive board itself will also be elected there. So the membership will change, as it does every year of the EB. And so the president can make it known who he's interested in, or the president can speak with the candidates and maybe discourage a candidate or encourage a candidate. But I think it was Juan Antonio who said, I can't make something happen, but I can prevent something from happening, which is a difference, but an important one.
And this is the same thing in real life. Yeah.
Exactly. And he was an interesting man. Someday they'll do a real study on him.
Yeah, and finally, the most important thing is to have a great relationships with all the members of the IOC.
Yes, as much as possible. As that's what some people say, oh, it's gushy, blah, 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 the stuff about the Olympic family. But it is, that's who we are. And volunteers, yes, nowadays, by the way, this wasn't the case until 1984, I think, where before that, IOC members had to pay their own way wherever they went and had to, except for staying at the Olympic Games. But other than that, they were on their own. So you pretty much had to be a wealthy person to be an IOC member, or else be from a country where the country would take care of that for you, which is not really what the IOC wanted. But so now it's really the IOC paying the costs for IOC members, which I think is better.
And what big changes have you seen all these years regarding the place of women in sport?
Well, the big changes, for example, I think I think there are 4 women on the executive board now out of 15. And that's been the case for a while now. So women vice presidents, nothing unusual about that. presidents of international federations, not so unusual. Unfortunately, still very rare. We should have more of that. And in the federations, as the IOC, we now have a kind of a 12-year limit on presidency, 1 8-year term and 1 additional 4-year term. Federation should similarly have limits on how long someone can be president, and that's been one of the greatest problems for women moving up, because I spent 20 years as vice president of the noblest sports, and but when I left, the president left too, so that was fine. But that just jams stuff up for too long, and someone who's given key years of their lives when they could have been making money and doing other things for their family feels like, well, I did all this, now I got to benefit from it. Well,
but this is a choice.
Exactly.
And this is like a passion, like sport is a passion. So I think this is a very big honor to be part of this committee.
Oh, it is. It's huge to be able to know that decisions that we make will either have a big difference in the future, so more people can take part in sport, or will kill it. So we have to be very careful about the decisions that we make.
Yeah. And do you think that women at the head of the committee will be possible one day?
Absolutely. As I say, we're all human. We're all the same. It's a matter of putting together the right number of votes and get the right people together. Everything's got to be right. The right moment, right number, all this stuff. But yeah, sure. Why not? Why not?
In 2013, during the 57th session of the United States Commission on the Status of Women, you explained that IOC has taken the lead in efforts to eliminate sexual harassment and abuse in sports. 11 years later, do you think things have changed in the good way or not?
We have moved a long way since then. Have things gotten better? Yes. Are things perfect? No, not yet. There's more work to be done. Unfortunately, there are bad humans out there, and bad humans have a way of keeping their bad humanness going. And I'm so proud of us having safe sport in the U.S., but one organization can't take care of over 300 million people, especially a not-for-profit organization where we have to raise the money to put up the funding for it. And the USOPC, U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, never wanted to be the funder for this, because then people would be suspicious. But the U.S. House decided we had to pay for it, so we have no choice. We have to find $20 million to put into safe sport. It's gotten better, but we need to have the coaches, that the decision makers throughout the world understand that these are bad coaches and they should not be close to kids once we found a bad coach. And anybody can look at the safe sport results anytime, any day, every sport. So it's up there on the website, Safe Sports. I think it's .org.
And you were also campaigning for parity between athletes, which we'll finally have at Paris 2024, but also parity in governing bodies. Why do you think there are still so few women on top positions in sport? Is it because men don't give them a chance, for example?
How to crack the problem of being elected to leadership positions in sport. It is a tricky one. And the problem in part is that people stay for too long, blocking anybody else good. And it's tough when you have volunteers who are giving up probably their family time and maybe holiday time so that they can be able to spend the summer or whatever time it is with the sport. It's really tough to say to them now, okay, you did that for 10 years and now you only have 2 more years and you got to go. Well, it's hard for someone who's rearranged their life for 10 years and now told that in 2 years it's all over. So I understand that. However, that's why we have that's why the competition gets younger, not older. Maybe I would harm somebody, but they'd laugh so hard as I was getting out my boat to compete. But we know that time goes by and your moment to be the best and the baddest, it may be over. Someone else will do that. Similarly, as Juan Antonio said during a congressional hearing, he was, shall we say, invited to attend. He said the cemeteries are filled with irreplaceable people. It's like, oh, yeah, good point. Excellent point. We manage, the world keeps turning, the sun keeps coming up, the world moves on. We have to make good decisions, and we have to be clear on the goals so that the decisions make sense.
And for so long, women wasn't heard enough. And do you think it's still the case, or maybe today, because this is the same problem for athletes or women in a leadership position, but also for us, for example, for me, as a journalist in sport, we are not heard enough, but I think things are coming to change one day.
Yeah, things have gotten better. One thing we noticed about maybe 12 years ago was that during the games, the proportionate amount of reportage for women and men was proportionate to the number of women and men from that country at the games, which is good. Now, my question is, all right, closing ceremonies, the games are over. Do women disappear for another 4 years? No. But there's no reporting on women in sport except during the games. Why is that? Women don't just disappear. The exploits of sports are just as extraordinary. Well, of course, the Olympic Games are supposed to be the best of the best for 4 years. But still, it makes no sense that suddenly women just disappear for another 4 years. So more work has to be done. The stories maybe have to be more compelling. Maybe we old gals have to do a better job of telling the stories, or something hasn't happened that needs to happen. I don't like, again, the word parity, because that sounds like, oh, it's almost even, but not quite. We're all equally human and should be treated as such.
And everyone have to has the same chance.
Yes, although there comes a point where once you've made decisions, sometimes you've foregone some opportunities, and that's what life is about: choosing the right opportunities.
Yeah.
And so if you choose a set of opportunities that are important to you, but then close off a set of other opportunities, if you've chosen well for yourself.
And for several months now, we've been analyzing the history of women in particularly French sport. Nevertheless, we would have liked to have some elements to compare with others, because this is not the same way in the countries. Within the IOC, have you noticed that some countries are good students for the evolution of women more than other countries?
Well, certainly France is an extraordinary example. And it's so embarrassing to me. I'm blanking on her name, the great French woman who started having the track meets, which had thousands and thousands of people come and watch women in track, which is what forced the men to finally say, okay, we'll put women's events in the Olympic Games in 1908.
Do you talk about Marie-Josée Pérec?
No.
No? Oh.
Pardon?
It was
in the 20s. I just can't I'm just blanking on her name, which is terrible. I should get out my old speeches.
We'll find it. Julien, I think you can.
Yeah.
You guys should know her name.
But you're right that France were very modern in some ways. This is the same thing even out of sport in the society in general. Like in the 20s, it was what we called les années folles in French, so the crazy years. And these years were very important for sport, but also in society.
Yeah, and freeing women. Yeah, as I say, a society, you can tell how free a society is by whether or not what the access is to sports, and you can't take part in sports if you don't have free time.
And in this book, we analyze a lot the history, the society, also with sport, because the two are very connected. And when there is an evolution in society, there is an evolution in sports in general. Julien, did you find the name or?
No, I didn't find the name. But with the people we talked, the French sportswomen, they told us that America and Great Britain are much better than France. Why? They told us that USA are 20 years in advance of France.
I don't know. We used to say, I remember the folks from my friends in Australia said that the US was 20 years ahead of Australia. But I don't know how we could be 20 years ahead of France. I just heard a report on the number of women who are CEOs of U.S. corporations. It's tiny. It's like 2%. So we've spoken a lot about making big changes, and we've made a few, but not so much. I'm delighted that we have Vice President Harris as Vice President. But we've got a long way to go in this country, a very long way to go, unfortunately. But as long as people think we're further along and we can use that to get stuff done, that's fine. What was that woman's name? And also another name that you should know is Monique Berliou.
Monique. Yeah, the first director of IOC in the 60s.
Yes, 60s to 80s for a long time. Yeah.
And this woman was a little bit forgotten.
No, she was pushed out of the picture. She was not forgotten. She was pushed out of the picture. She's an Olympic swimmer, and competed for, of course, France. But the week before her competition, she had an appendicitis. It's not a good thing to do before you're going to swim at the Olympic Games. Anyway, then she wanted to be a journalist for the IOC, and then moved to Lausanne to do that, and then found that there was nobody really running the shop, so she took over. And that's how she did it. And for years and years and years. So she was advisor to Juan Antonio as he was making his run for presidency, and helped him. But then he got afraid of her because she was so powerful and wanted her gone. What can you say?
Yeah.
He was president, I wasn't.
And this is sad because we spoke with some specialists, and everyone say to us that there is no books about Monique Berliou. There is nothing about her, and that's
not true. The LA 84 Foundation, we did an oral video history with her.
Okay.
So you can check that out. I might have been falling asleep some of the time, but it wasn't about me. It was about her.
In France, there is Alice Milla too.
That's Milla. That's who I was trying to think.
Oh, okay. You know,
few people know her in France, but is she known around the world?
She is, if I made a speech. If I can remember her name. Yeah, I mean, she changed track and field for the Olympic movement because she saw the value in watching women compete.
Yeah, she's very important in history and in the evolution of women. We have a chapter about her here.
Good. Very good. She's deserving of it.
Yeah, she's very important, and she's French, so that's perfect for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And how did
there's one other woman that you might, Baroness von Suttner, in the invitation. You know about her story? The invitation.
Not really.
Okay, the invitation for the Paris, the meeting that ended in the creation of the modern Olympic Games. There was a Baron von Suttner as one of the conveners. Well, Baron von Suttner was long gone, so it could only have been Baroness von Suttner, who was the one in, who's the guy? She worked for the guy who created dynamite, who also created
Nobel?
Yes, he worked for Albert Nobel, and was given the task of setting up the Nobel Prize after his death. And so she was one of the folks. They were peaceniks, most of them. That's not a right word for that era, but they were interested in having peace. And so that seemed to fit well. Oddly enough, the guy who created really dynamite, although the Chinese had created it long ago, but had made it easy for people to access it, was the one in charge of the Peace Prize. I found that to be ironic.
And how did the IOC try to get rid of the bad habits of its first members? It's no secret that, for example, Pierre de Coubertin was quite misogynist. So how did this change? And this is very important that because the IOC changed very in an important way all these years after.
Mm-hmm. Well, it took a very long time to make the changes because the world of sport was what it was, and nobody asked why, as far as I could tell, until the late 1960s, 70s. Why? And why not have women involved? And once that started happening, it's like, yeah, we need to do this. It's a part of our humanness to take part in sport. So how did it change? It changed because people changed. That's the easiest way.
Naturally. Like in a logical way.
No longer Pierre, and now Anita. And soon no longer Anita, and then Pietro. I don't know.
Yeah.
And when before becoming vice president, you were captain of the rowing team and won a bronze medal at the Olympic Games in 1976. What did the Olympics game mean to you when you were an athlete?
Well, my goal was to be an Olympic gold medalist, champion and gold medalist. And so it meant being the best that I could possibly be and being better than anybody else. So we were a tad bit disappointed when we got over to the stand, and we were exhausted, and it was really mean that we didn't have a chance to warm down because all of the bad stuff was in our bloodstream, and one of our members looked kind of green to me. I don't know if that was me or her, but she didn't look good. So we were in bad shape, and we weren't that happy about winning a bronze because we were up against two countries that no longer exist. The GDR, German Democratic Republic of Germany, and the Soviet Union. Well, they're gone. And unfortunately, we were pretty sure they were dope. Well, we knew they were dope, but about it. Every time I looked at the race, we came in third. So I should be grateful that we did that against two countries that no longer belong to the citizens of Earth anymore.
And who was your idol as a sportswoman, but not necessarily as a sportswoman, maybe a woman, politics woman or philosophic woman? I don't know.
What did you think? What was the first part? I'm sorry.
Yeah, who were your idols? Not necessarily sportswoman.
Yeah. Okay. Growing up, there weren't any. So Wilma Rudolph, as I got a little bit into high school age. My great grandmother and Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman is, she's amazing. She escaped and won her own freedom. And then she went back to help other people, which is just extraordinary, as far as I could tell. Extraordinary.
I would like to, because you spoke about your idols, and I would like to say that I think it's interesting because a lot of the women who practiced sports in the 80s or 90s, their idols were men because they were not a lot of women in sports, and I think this is interesting because now the athletes can have some women in women idols because women can finally practice sport. What do you think about it?
Oh, definitely. It makes a huge difference. I mean, even little boys can have women as idols, and the reverse, of course. Well, we've had women having male athletes as idols for a long, long time. So, of course, it'd be the other way. It's about people recognizing excellence and appreciating it for that. And then, if they can, helping others get to the same place, sharing their opportunity with others. And that's really what we're supposed to do, I figure, as we're on Earth.
At the beginning of the call, you said that the more important is not to be the first one, but not to be the last one. Do you feel that a generation after you will continue what you start to do?
Oh, yes, I'm really excited about the next generation. I think they'll be even better. I forget what they are. I know I'm towards the end of the baby boomers, and I forget what's next, X, Y, Z, P, whatever. But they have almost grown up in the electronic age. They're not quite, they weren't the little kid that on the magazine couldn't get the magazine to move when they pushed it, but almost. So they'll be more in tune with the remarkable things that humans can do if we work together. And I think it'll be very exciting. I wrote an article maybe not quite a decade ago about the future of the games, where I said that the energy needs would be taken from the energy that the athletes create when they're competing on the field of play, so that there would be no huge problem with using extra energy during the time of the games, wherever it was. Actually, I put it in Haiti at Port-au-Prince. And they wouldn't have to build new hotels, but you could just tell something or other yourself to Miami to stay in the hotels there, and then come to Port-au-Prince for the games. Anyway, I thought it was quite amusing. And just thinking of the future, there's so much potential there and so much possibility, especially if we're willing to let people do what they can do best as humans.
And Marie-Georges Buffet, French Minister of Sports in the late 90s, recently declared that the problem in French sports is in French, we say entre soi. It's when it's always the same people on the head of federation. That is the biggest problem in France. Do you think it's the same problem for certain international federation?
Could be. Let's look at how long the leadership has been there, and if there's an athletes commission that's been active, why they haven't been able to make any changes. Each sport has its own story, and that's why the IOC allows each sport to be a specialist, because we can't possibly be a specialist. I think I forget how many sports there are on the program. I know for 28, we're going to have
A lot.
36 sports.
Yeah.
In Paris, you don't have quite so many in Paris, which is a good thing, perhaps.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
you're doing things with spectators like the after run for the marathon and other things to involve the citizens in sport, which is good.
And
Yeah.
let's. Oh no! Come on, you can again.
In 2026, that will be in a World Cup. In 2028, it will be Los Angeles Olympic Games. What does Olympics means for American people, and more of that, what sports mean for American people?
Okay, it's hard to answer the question of what sports means to each American because it's so different. I mean, even within my own family, it might be different. For example, I call what we call American football, I call men in tights, which same sport, but just a different name. Um, I enjoy sports because it shows us kind of not quite the Olympic Games, but a celebration of excellence of people learning skills and then putting those skills into play onto the field of play. And so sports is fun. It's fun to watch. It's fun to be a part of. It's fun to play. And if it's not fun, you need to stop because then it's a job. And if it's a job, it's not supposed to be fun. Oh, actually, jobs can be fun. I've had fun jobs. But, it's about the best in humanness that sports brings out.
In 2001, you ran for the president IOC place. What do you remember about this moment? You almost create history.
Yes, but almost is most important, I guess, in horseshoes and not much else. But it would have been different. For me, an American, Avery Brundage was the last American, and he and I would have not much in common at all, except we had the same passport. Actually, it's funny, he became president the year I was born, which is kind of an interesting. But the difference between me and I didn't fully appreciate all the intrigue within the IOC. And so I learned a lot. That's okay. The sun came up the next morning and everything was fine.
And what is your best souvenir as a vice president in the IOC?
The best year? Well,
souvenir. If you have the best memory.
Oh, best memory. Well, I do remember one time when I was presenting medals. Only IOC members can present medals at the Olympic Games. So I was presenting medals in the rowing, and I'd already presented a medal in the 4, and a woman who had been a spare actually won a gold medal in the 4 oared show with God. So I'm going, oh my goodness, congratulations. So I'm going along presenting the gold medal in the 8. And I'm going on and said, you won 2 gold medals as a spare. This is not possible. So she had done something I'm sure all of us dream of someday doing, not going through all the stuff it is, but then you don't make the team. So you just got, oh man, I got to stay in shape just in case. And suddenly you're in, not only in once, but in twice. And you won 2 gold medals as a spare. Yeah. Now that was pretty amazing. And I did nothing but present the medal, but I still remember it. Kay Worthington. That was the name.
Oh, okay.
We have the impression that history is important for IOC because we can see a lot of old video of the old edition. Why that's important, that much important for IOC, that we remember the history of each edition of the Olympic Games?
That's what sports is about. It's about storytelling, basically. It's about telling the story of what you've seen, which was impressive, of what you believe, that really made a difference. It's sharing with someone else the experience that you had, maybe getting to that event. Maybe you met somebody that's become your friend forever, or you had an experience. It's about life, and the experience of sport is something that we can share as humans. We understand what it's about, and it's something, as I said, is a uniquely human experience.
And what else do you think needs to change to improve the position of women in sports in general?
Well,
because we are in 2024, and this is not women are not considered as men. There is some things to change.
Yeah, we still have to recognize the humanness in women and men, and the fairness with which we should approach both human and men and women, the humanity in both men and women, and make it work. Instead of saying, okay, for this position we have to have a male, for this, and then a female, then that's not the way to do it. Who has the resources to help us the most? And how long can that person help us? Can it be a few months or a year or not long at all? But, thinking about the future is really important. And that's something that all of us humans can do.
And do you think you've done everything you wanted to do?
Goodness, no. The world would be a much different place if I had done everything I wanted to do, for sure.
You can, maybe. You can.
I've got a little time left. I've managed to stay in here. So we'll see. We'll see.
Julien,
and I want to know, in a stadium, what was the sports performance that amazes you the most? A memory of you when you see something, a sports, and you say, wow, it was amazing.
Wow, that's a tough one for me, because I've been able to see so much, from the scampering up the walls of the wall climbers who they really go fast. It's impressive. To knowing what it feels like to race across 2,000 meters. There have been so many amazing things. There was at the Asian Games, a man taking his horse. Actually, he was a crown prince of one of the very important nations there. Took his horse all the way to the top of the stadium, and it looked for a second like the horse might fall over, but the horse did what the horse needed to do. And the royal family didn't know it was going to happen, but they were happy that everything went well. So there are many, many, many. And then moments, as a friend told me, her mother told her when the games were here in '84, a policeman actually stopped traffic mid-block so that she crossed the street with her grandchild and get closer to the venue. So magic happens around the Olympic Games.
Yeah, this is.
And you'll have wonderful things happen in Paris, no doubt about it. I can hardly wait for those games to begin.
You will be there?
I will be there.
Okay, perfect.
And I just wanted to know, I forgot the name in English, but during the Olympic Games, there is 15 days for where
Glory.
All the war stop. No, it's not the war stop, but
the truce. The truce.
Yeah.
The Olympic truce.
Well,
it's supposed to be the month. Yeah.
Okay.
The month of the game.
When IOC installed this, when it was created?
Well, okay. How to say this? The thought is that at one time, the truth is probably that athletes were able to go through free to get to the games. Some people say that all wars stop. That's not logical, to have all wars stop. What's logical is to let the athletes pass through to get to the games. And that seems logical to me. You can believe it either way. We can't prove it either way. But I think it's true that the athletes were let through. So the idea is to have a truce that would have the better idea of nobody being at war and nobody starting a war. And that's what the Russians did bad after Sochi. They started the war and then made it even worse after was it Beijing? Yeah, Beijing, when they invaded Ukraine. So they violated the truce twice. What can you do? They knew about it. Certainly in 2014, they knew, because they're part of getting it passed, even though it was earlier in the year. It had been passed the previous year in order for it to work. So there are a lot of politicians. The Olympic movement cannot control the political world. I wish we could.
Of course. Yeah.
We cannot. And the less, I just hope we'll stop using the B word, because every time it comes up, it hurts the Olympic movement for no reason other than the fact that people have doubt.
And I just wanted to say that I have the impression that it was in the 90s that triggered a big change in the acceptance of women in sports. When you arrived, are you agree with this? Because, for example, in society, I think the big change comes in the 17th, for example. But in sports, and especially in the Olympic Games, I think the big change were on the 19th.
In the 1900s?
Yeah.
Towards the end of it, yes. Towards, I would say, the last 30 years of the 1900s, 1976 onward, were years of great change and much more opportunity for women to become involved in sports at all levels. And some of the great coaches of the era were women, who are kind of lost to the annals of history, unfortunately. But then even like Tara Vanderveer, who I think just became the winningest coach in all of the NC2A history. Not mistaken. I think that just happened. Or maybe it's been a week now since it happened. It's going to happen soon. So, women have been there. It's just putting the spotlight on them. And in the world of journalism, to make sure that the stories are told. You don't know about a player until you know about a player. And how do you know about a player unless you read or hear about a player? So.
And for example, Alice Mia was forgotten a long time because nobody talks about her. So, but I think this is very scary when you think about it. That the big change was in 1996, 100 years after the first Olympic Games. That's scary.
I know, it's ridiculous, but at least it happened.
Yeah, you're right. I never thought like that, but you're right. Right. It happens. Yeah.
Someone said that Stephen Hawking asked, and okay, so before the Big Bang, what was there? Good question. We've been focusing on the Big Bang so long, we don't know.
Yeah, and now we have to wait for a bigger change.
Yeah, and there will. I'm confident that humanity is getting better and better, despite some off-roads we take with, for example, someone I call Orange Julius, but I will not say any other name.
And a lot of sportswomen we interview during months say the same sentence: "We need idols to feel inspired." This is a sentence you understand?
I do. I guess because I came at a time when there weren't any, it didn't seem to matter so much. I just wanted to be able to do, I maybe because I had three brothers, I just wanted to be able to do some of the stuff that they had fun doing. But I could throw the U.S. football. You can't tackle the quarterback in tag football, so I could do that, but that was about it. So anyway, things, and they have to change. Again, we have more leisure time than we used to. We're not toiling from dawn till dusk out in the fields anymore. So what are we doing is the question. And are we doing the right stuff with our time?
Yeah.
Mm.
I don't have any question. And you, Julien?
No more question for me.
I think we're done.
Okay.
But
All
thank
right.
you. This was very, very nice to talk to you and very interesting.
Good. It's my pleasure. And maybe I'll see you in 6 months or 5
In
years.
Paris, exactly, in Paris.
Very good.